Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Get Out of Jail Free Radio Hour. I am your host and guide, Mr. Crispy, speaking to you through uncanny frequencies and sharing with you stories strange, fascinating, and terrifying. The views and opinions expressed on air are solely those of the speaker. The Get Out of Jail Free Radio Hour is an entertainment program, and any similarities to any person living or dead, or any place or events, are entirely coincidental. The Get Out of Jail Free Radio Hour was created except as indicated by Matt Henshaw. Listener discretion is advised. And now, take Mr. Crispy's moldering hand in yours, ignore that tacky fluid under my nails, and join me for the Get Out of Jail Free Radio Hour. Improv. Sweat beaded on the drummer's forehead, running down his beard and hitting the tom drum, microsounds against the hammering he was giving to the snares and cymbals. He was insensate to the passage of time, but the set had gone on for nearly 25 minutes by this point, and the band was in the third of 4 passages they had loosely composed that afternoon. The squall of saxophone and guitar fed through various effects pedals and then blasted out of second-hand amplifiers, assaulted the audience of 30, huddled in the basement where a friend of the band had agreed to let them play. Low, droning tones were added by the bass player, an aural ocean upon which the drummer's cymbals and drums served as waves and foam. The squall of saxophone and guitar disassembled into gull cries. All of the band members' heads were down, careful listening to one another's sounds, in spite of what to all auditory evidence was a chaotic maelstrom. They hadn't noticed the presence which manifested in the dark corner of the cellar, weaving itself into being from the vibrations and shadows. The rest of the audience hadn't either, most stoned on cheap weed or drunk on cheap beer. The few others who were really into the music intently focused on the direction this third improvisation was going. The presence took the form of a man, dressed as though coming from an office job. He wore a brimmed hat which obscured his eyes, but not his ability to take in the room. His lips were thin, a neutral expression upon them. His visage belied no emotion beneath. He was not quite thin, but also not fat. He stood still, the shadows of his cloak. He had on his right hand 7 fingers, one of the extra digits between his ring and pinky finger and nearly as long as his middle, the other a second thumb jutting at a nearly right angle from the first. The index finger, longer than the middle, made motions which drew in the air a variety of polygonal shapes. Where the finger traced, a dim light hung in the air like contrails. The cymbals stacked themselves until a sphere of light pulsed. The band did not notice what their sounds were contributing to the presence's movements. They were lost in the listening, the music acting as a hypnotic agent. One woman in the audience, holding a warm beer bottle in her lap, involuntarily raised a finger to her face. She felt a light trickle of blood running out of her nose. She did nothing to staunch the flow, though. She, too, was in the thrall of the tonal waves washing over her and the audience, and the band as they lulled into an ambient drone. The sound rose and fell with the pulse of the presence's sphere of light, which steadily sank to and through the concrete floor. As the last segment of the glowing orb retreated into the floor, as if on cue, the band again whipped themselves into a free improv fury. The saxophone player utilized extended breathing techniques, making one screeching wall of sound as they inhaled and exhaled through the horn, fingers a blur over the keys. The guitarist and bassist were nearly twinned in how they hunched over their instruments, left and right hands moving in impossible ways that created indescribable and excoriating tones. The drummer's feet, bare and bruised, mercilessly pounded against the bass drum pedal and hi-hat pedals, as his arms battering at his kit, taking on the form of an octopus's tentacles, or perhaps a spider mad on LSD. The temperature in the dank basement went from a clammy cool to a humid warmth, rising nearly 10 degrees from the heat emanating from the band. The inebriated from the audience were now unconscious, minds plagued by nightmares which would haunt them for years to come. Some of these were not mere creations of their minds, though, as the sensate of the audience could attest. The floor bubbled, taking the form of the waves that were purely oral moments ago. An appendage like a rudimentary paw extended out, grabbing several of the audience and pulling them down. All of their noses were bleeding now, and a few had the presence of mind to cry out as they were dragged down. As they were taken, the presence and the band rose a dozen centimeters over the liquefying floor. The band were still in the midst of their playing and didn't notice. The presence didn't care. Bobbing on the floor, metal from piercings and fillings floated, refused by the ocean that had now taken a dozen of the audience. Still the music played on, truly edging into chaos that could not rightfully be said to have originated from any human musical impulse. The guitarist began to gutturally scream. What prompted this was unclear, as he had not been truly witnessing any of the horrors that might have been a rational explanation. Out of the drummer's back emerged vestigial limbs, bursting from skin and blood spattering in a puddle underneath him. In these limbs were gripped centipede-like objects, which writhed and hissed as the limbs battered the metal and skin of the kit and the drummer himself. Echoing the guitarist's yells, the presence whispered the same syllables, continuing to draw in the air their strange symbols. Now above, a few millimeters below the ceiling, a square aperture began to spin and expand, blue light from within pouring out like water. The light fell as though it were water rising from below, subsuming the floating band and presence. Where the light touched the band, the members went rigid still, bleeding from ears, eyes, nose, pores. Where light touched the presence, it began to unravel like smoke, polluting the light with dark specks that metastasized. Soon the band's instruments were feeding back and shorting out their amplifiers, while the drums rippled and tore themselves apart. The gore exiting the band puddled on the still liquid floor, floating among the metallic substances. The presence had now become incorporeal again, feedback fading from ruined instruments. The few who were unconscious awoke to a largely empty room, not remembering how they got there. On the floor were piles of metal, wood, and a gelatinous mass that no one could identify. They silently rose and ascended to street level. Those who lived in the house years later could still swear they heard anguished screams when they placed their ears against the wall and listened. And now from old Wyethscope's quarterly concern, the meteorological forecast. This month expect precipitation amounts to fall above average. This is because of a fine sacrifice the previous quarter, and we thank the Richards for their gift of little Linda towards ensuring enough rain for the crops. Winds will pick up the last third of the quarter, as they always do. Their strange melodies will be sure to drive the less stable of the community mad, believing an apocalypse to follow. Those in care of these touched souls are encouraged to ensure they have a ready supply of cotton balls to plug up the afflicted's ears. Ever since Johnny returned from the battle, his knee has proved infallible in determining the type and quantity of clouds floating in the heavens above us. He reports that there shall be 80 of the nimbus variety and a dozen of the cumulus. Then Johnny seemed to enter a trance state, where, in a trembling voice, he warned of a wondrous strange cloud I cannot name, hued with grades of steel. Lightning azure strikes down, setting a conflagration of the old church-stead. Alack! The horror within it booms with a voice that makes my legs a-quake. It is done! Repent! before falling unconscious and shaking as though in a fit. We wish Johnny a speedy recovery. And now we bring you sage advice and fortunes based on your zodiacal sign. Cancer. The song you are hearing in your head is not just in your head. All will hear it soon, and only those most fit will survive its terrible chorus. Be patient. Lucky numbers 2, 4, 9. Leo. That thing on your neck grows, but not on the exterior. A barber should be sought out to lance the foul thing before infection sets in. Lucky numbers 34, 26, 99. Virgo. Buried under the tombstone reading, "Here lies Veronica Johns, born 1842, died 1849, rest angel," is a garment for your darling little girl. Disinter it with care and avoid the watchful gaze of the groundskeeper. Lucky numbers 10, 100, 1000. Sagittarius. Your luck in love is about to change for the better. The louse infestation will die down and not deter romantic advances from your desired paramour. Clean thoroughly afterwards. Lucky numbers 14, 2, 98. Aries. Lurking there, in the shadows, the vicar sings to you. Heed their call, and eternal shall be your reward. Ignore them at your peril. Lucky numbers 7, 93, 1004. And now Old Wyethscope's Quarterly Concern presents Around the House. Things to do when quarantined. Your sinuses are congested, and you're hacking up a brown slime. Your thermometer reads 102 degrees, but you can't stop shaking from the chills. Sounds like you've caught a nasty little virus, and for public health's sake, you should probably isolate yourself. A call with your doctor has you confident it will clear up in the next week or so, though he did end the call screaming obscenities for 15 seconds before the connection was cut. Here are some ideas to help you pass the time and make the most out of your time away from bothersome people. Write a letter to a friend. This is a fine and dandy way to keep your personal relationships up to date. You may choose a ballpoint, fountain, or quill pen. Ink is fine, though maybe you want to go through the moldering pile of magazines you've been stockpiling for all these years, and cut and paste letters and words onto the page. Tell them you've been thinking about that secret you swore you would keep decades ago, and that a little voice is telling you to let the authorities know. Tell them how you suspect their child has been abducted and replaced by a nearly identical but slightly off twin. Tell them how you could really use tens of thousands of dollars, and how it might secure the release of a notable celebrity from their bondage. The sky's the limit. Housekeeping. Your domicile has become cluttered and untidy over the months, and it's time to make your place spick and span clean. Put on your finest rubber gloves and go over every surface, searching for the slightest stain and smear. I bet you forgot about that rusty, fuzzy blood stain around the tub drain that you kept telling yourself you'd clean up, but never did. The bones of dear old Uncle Ralph in the sitting room won't dust themselves. Just how long have those kidneys and liver been sitting in the back of the refrigerator? Playing games. If you can't keep yourself amused, how can you ever hope to amuse others when you're allowed to be social again? Solitaire with a deck of cards is so last century. When you were cleaning, you discovered a small colony of cockroaches living behind your stove. Invite them out for pinochle or scratch. Berate them as you would your poker buddies. Crack open a frosty beer and play charades or 23 skidoo. Listen to their clicks, and you'll soon understand them even better than your poker friends, your work friends, or any friends you've ever had. Soon they'll teach you new games, fun games, painful games. You may grow to prefer the company of your new roach community. Perhaps you'll gather materials to make a shiny carapace for yourself and begin to spend more time in the wall behind the stove.
Trembling, I embraced the worm in all its glory.
And now, persons to know, a stranger is just a friend you haven't met yet. Tonight we discuss writer and teratologist the undead Patricia Highsmith. Born of Jonathan and Carol Highsmith in the Scottish village of Craghoy on the island of Hoyan 1183, she was their 8th child, 6th youngest, predeceased by 5 of her older siblings. As Jonathan tended to the fields, Carol taught Patricia chores and child-rearing. Carol died in her 9th childbirth, that child also being stillborn, when Patricia was 4 years old. Huns invaded the village, killing 90% of the populace. Patricia hid herself in the one wall of her cottage not burned in the pillage of Vilcor the Terrible. 5 days later, Patricia emerged from the rubble unharmed. The surviving villagers shunned her, thinking her a witch. Patricia wandered for 85 years. Peculiarly, she only seemed to age a few hours every year, less so when she lived off the fat bogs of the land. Her wanderings took her to the main British Isle, where she lived unnoticed for a couple of centuries in the nascent city of London. Around 1382, she found a pamphlet that would serve as her first exposure to the written word. She aged 3 weeks over approximately 8 years, a growth spurt supposed to be due to her tutelage under a Rabbi Mamadine in the 15th century. Over the course of what she would call her early adulthood, records are sketchy at best, but it is surmised it would be in the late 1400s to early 1500s. She befriended a deaf monk named Cedric the Obtuse, who taught her to speak the words the rabbi had taught her to read. Her speaking voice was a feral, hooting crow, like a cross between a rooster and an owl, and drove those who heard it mad. She eventually grew to modulate her voice into something more tolerable to the human ear, while still holding within it the potential to drive the listener to act according to wills not of their own, not even Patricia's. In the early 1700s, Patricia sailed the high seas, hiding as was her expertise in the hull of a ship bound for Southeast Asia. Arriving at the port of Yangsao, erroneously in Korea, Patricia spent approximately 14 minutes in a public market, where she alarmed the marketeers by aging 20 years. She would eventually blame this unfortunate growth spurt for increasing her height by 7 inches, causing a wart the shape of a scarab to grow on her foot, and her left nostril to double in diameter relative to her right. Crone-like now, Patricia absconded from the Asian subcontinent never to return, though from one of her scribes she learned the art of kimchi, which she has eaten daily since then. Advancing through the centuries to the early 20th, Patricia began to write short stories. She often submitted these under pseudonyms and would destroy any payment in a pyre of twigs and black rock. In 1942, she published her first novel. This is notable as it was the first novel with lesbian protagonists who, by the end, were owners and operators of a business selling birds and bird ephemera. The publisher, Thomas Morehunt, was skeptical of such a denouement, but time has gone on to show Mr. Morehunt's short-sightedness. It is unclear when her studies of tarot began, but what is clear is Miss Highsmith's reading techniques are uncommonly accurate. It is whispered that she is in congress with beings for whom time is a literal river, and that she accesses their perspectives to prognosticate on events to come. She is rumored to have been present at various soirees in Paris held by occult surrealists in the 1950s and 60s, though these reports cannot be confirmed. Accounts vary as to Patricia's current residence and whether she is, in fact, undead. But occasionally, an unexpectedly prescient piece of literature, remembered by almost exclusively wealthy septuagenarians, will find its way into the zeitgeist of an esoteric readership, only to vanish again without a trace. Fiction Corner. The proportions of the thing rebelled against the golden ratio. Bulbous growths emerged from corners and joints which ought not to have spawned such obscenities. Or it may have been my rebelling mind that imagined those impossible things because it could not bear the grim reality piled around me. A mad eye, rolling like a child's marble, came to a stop, gazing at me with hatred. A limb extended from the mass, terminating in a paw writhing with 100 caterpillar-like digits. There was a wet sucking as from an aspirating invalid. Mounds I took to be lungs shivered in time. Where it touched my face, my skin began to twitch as though afflicted by a palsy. Pin-pricking pressure turned to a null paralysis, and the side untouched could sense the other side drooping as though I had a stroke. Perhaps I was, because I was suddenly aware of my loss of numerical knowledge. A passerby asking how many fingers they were holding up would only receive a dumb blank stare from me in return. A warmth bloomed in my throat, and my body made to heave it out, but it caught, clicking halfway out of my mouth. A black bubble burst from my mouth, expanding like an obsidian balloon. Within were flecks of amber that glowed like fire and flew like wasps, angrily bumping against the inner wall of the bubble, but not breaking it. It grew larger, half the size of my head, now twice its size, expanding faster than my respiration. My eyes grew wider as the sphere grew heavier, pulling me forward and down into the filth of abomination around me. A sound not unlike a chortle passed through a slit in one of the mounds, and the bubble still filled. From within I could hear wet, flashy slaps that I could only guess were pieces of me leaving my body to fill the balloon. My skin grew tighter against my bones, muscle sloughing up and out of my mouth, feeding the flesh wasps who grew brighter and more agitated. The sound of their collisions in the bubble was akin to popcorn popping, but still the sphere expanded, now the size of my shrinking body. I was hoisted aloft as my substance diminished. I felt imprisoned by my very self. What I suppose was my ego shouted at me to relent and go unconscious, but this was not its will. No, it needed me to bear witness to this agony and suffering, to experience every awful jot of it. I was now fully off the ground, and the entity around me began to ooze a creamy soup which glistened off of the mounds. Sounds came into my mind of grinding that caused vertigo and nausea. I began to sink down into my bubble, feeling the membrane touch and then accept the skin of my face. Though I didn't want to, my eyes saw the world as though I had gone underwater, shades of gray through a stretched, translucent skin of the bubble. As more of me entered the still expanding balloon, my body was buffeted by the wasps careening inside. They left behind scorched wens, which immediately expanded and burst in milky, sizzling ponds of pus. These dripped into the pool of gore, brownish red, which sat in the bottom of the vestibule. Finally, a flesh wasp speeding past my field of vision burst through the taut membrane of the balloon, and a hissing commenced, which combined with the roar and grinding to cause a terrible cacophony which drove me further into madness. I fell, the sluice entering my nose, battery acid hot, as the bubble collapsed around me. My hands became mad claws, swimming in an attempt to break free of this shroud, as I bit down on my tongue and cracked some molars. Sense continued to escape from my brain, much as the wasps made their exodus into the real world, and the entity continued to tally my pain. The Supper by Alfonso Reyes, translated by Michael Sisko. Supper, which delights us and inspires love. San Juan de la Cruz. I was running through unfamiliar streets. My destination seemed to recede before my steps, and the appointed hour was already humming in the public clocks. The streets stood empty. Electric lights danced, streaking like snakes before my eyes. Circular plazas were constantly springing up before me, their vegetation endowed with an unreal elegance in the night's artificial light. I believe I passed an incalculable number of towers. I don't know whether they were among the houses or the squares, flaunting to the four winds their four round clock faces, illuminated from within. I hurried, egged on by a superstitious presentiment about the time. If the 9 strokes of the bell, I told myself, surprise me before I get the door knocker in my hand, something bad will happen. And hurrying frantically, I remembered having hurried once before at this same hour to this place, and with similar eagerness. When? Finally, the pleasures of this false memory absorbed me so completely that I slipped into my normal pace without noticing. And by, in the lapses of my thoughts, I saw that I was still traveling, and there unfolded before me new perspectives of electric lights, of small planted squares, of illuminated clocks. I don't know how much time went by. It was as if I were asleep, and sick, struggling to breathe. Suddenly 9 sonorous chimes slithered across my epidermis with a metallic chill. My eyes, even as my hopes failed, fell on the nearest door. This was my destination. Then, pausing to compose my spirit, I reviewed my reasons for coming here. For yesterday, the postman had brought me a brief and suggestive invitation. In a corner of the paper there was written by hand the seal of a house. It was dated the previous day. The letter said only, Donna Magdalena and her daughter Amalia hope you shall dine with them tomorrow at 9 in the evening. Ah, if he does not fail us. Not one letter more. I always fall in with unexpected experiences. This case, besides, presented a singular attraction. The tone, familiar and respectful at once, with which this unnamed person was addressed by those unknown ladies, the morose, ah, if he does not fail us, so vague and so sentimental, that seemed suspended before an abyss of confessions, all combined to decide me. I went anxious with an unnameable emotion. When, at times, in my nightmares, I evoke again that fantastic night, whose fantasy is assembled out of quotidian things, and whose equivocal mystery grows from the humble root of what is possible, I seem to rush panting along avenues of clocks and towers, solemn as sphinxes, lining the aisle of some Egyptian temple. The door opened. I had been facing away toward the street, when a square of light suddenly fell on the ground, and in it my shadow was joined by the shadow of an unknown woman. I turned around, with the light shining behind her and into my dazzled eyes. To me this woman was nothing more than a silhouette, on which my imagination could paint various hypothetical physiognomies, without any one of them corresponding to her contour, and in this state I stammered some salutations and explanations. "Enter, please, Alfonso." And I entered, astonished at hearing myself summoned as if into my own home. The vestibule disappointed me. Upon the romantic words of the invitation, at least they seemed romantic to me, I had founded hopes of an encounter with an ancient house, full of tapestries, old portraits, and armchairs. An ancient house lacking in style but full of respectability. But instead of this I was confronted with a diminutive vestibule and with a flimsy, unelegant staircase, which foretold the cramped modern dimensions I could expect in the rest of the house. The flooring was of polished wood. The few bits of furniture had the chill luxury of things from New York, and on the wall covered in bright green paper there grimaced with unpardonable indications of impertinence 2 or 3 Japanese masks. I even began to doubt, but then I raised my eyes and my calm returned. Before me, dressed in black, slender, dignified, the woman who had come to guide me pointed to the door of the salon. Her silhouette had taken on a coloring of features. Her face had no special significance for me, its only noteworthy aspect being a reverent expression. Her chestnut locks, done up in a somewhat slack way, completed the formation of a strange conviction in my mind. It all seemed to knead and mold the suggestion of a name. "Amalia?" I asked. "Yes," and it seemed as if I had answered my own question. The salon, as I had imagined, was small. The decorations, which seemed to answer my previous expectations, clashed infamously with the decor of the vestibule. Here were the honorable tapestries and the massive armchairs, the bearskin on the floor, the mirror, the chimney, the vases, the piano complete with candlesticks and full of photographs and statuettes, the piano that no one ever touched. And beside it stood the prominent easel, with an enlarged and obviously retouched portrait. It showed a gentleman with a parted beard and a vulgar mouth. Donna Magdalena, who was already waiting for me installed in a red armchair, was also dressed in black and bore on her bosom one of those colossal jewels of our ancestors' time, a glass orb with a portrait inside, surrounded by a ring of gold. The mystery of the family resemblance took hold of me. My eyes shifted unconsciously from Donna Magdalena to Amalia, and from the portrait to Amalia. Donna Magdalena, noting this, abetted me in my investigations with some timely explanations. It would have been more proper for me to have been awkward, expressing surprise so as to prompt an explanation. But Donna Magdalena and her daughter Amalia hypnotized me, from the first moment, with their parallel gazes. Donna Magdalena was a woman of 60, so she passed on to her daughter the bother of initiating me. Amalia conversed with me. Donna Magdalena watched me. I was completely exposed to the whims of chance. It occurred to the mother, this was de rigueur, to remind us that it was already time for dinner. In the dining room the conversation became more general and topical. I ended by convincing myself that these ladies had wanted nothing more than to invite me to dine, and at the second glass of Chablis I felt myself overflow in the perfect egoism of a body charged with generous spirits. I conversed, I laughed, and I displayed all my ingenuity, inwardly trying to play down the strangeness of my situation. Up to that time the ladies had been making an effort to seem nice to me. From then on I felt I was striving to make myself agreeable to them. The reverent aspect of Amalia's face migrated at moments to her mother's face. The entirely physiognomic look of satisfaction on Donna Magdalena's face descended, at times, over her daughter's face. It seemed that these two attitudes floated in the ambience, shifting from one face to the other. I never could have anticipated the pleasures of this conversation, although there were vague hints at I don't know what evocations of Sudermann, with frequent recourse to the difficult terrain of domestic responsibilities and, as was natural with women of strong spirit, sudden flashes of Ibsen. I was enjoying myself as much as if I were visiting the home of some widowed aunt, in company with some friend of my early childhood, now becoming an old maid. At first the conversation concerned itself entirely with commercial matters, in which the two women seemed to take pleasure. There is no better subject than this when one are invited to the table as an outsider in an unfamiliar house. Later things took on a different aspect. Everything we said seemed to fly away like petitions dispatched into the distance. Everything moved towards an end that I could not foresee. In Amalia's face there appeared at last a pointed, disturbed smile. She began visibly struggling against some inner temptation. Her mouth trembled at times, so anxiously did she speak, and she ended her every phrase with a sigh. Her eyes widened suddenly, fixed with an expression of fright or abandon on the wall just over my shoulders, so that more than once, rattled, I turned my head to look myself. But Amalia did not seem aware of the alarm she caused me. She went on with her smiles, her frights, and her sighs, while I shuddered every time she looked over my head. Finally, between Amalia and Donna Magdalena, I was caught in a true colloquy of sighs. I was already getting tired of them. Near the center of the table and by the way, so low that it was a constant inconvenience, hung the lamp with 2 lights in it, and upon the walls it projected the faded shadows of the 2 women, in such distorted shapes that it was not possible to trace the correspondence between shadows and persons. A heavy depression invaded me, and a spirit of tedium was taking hold. Was that what drew from me this unexpected invitation? Let's go into the garden. The prospect of novelty revived my spirits. I was conducted across a patio whose cleanliness and sobriety put me in mind of a hospital. In the obscurity of the night, I could make out a little garden plot, small and artificial like those in cemeteries. We sat beneath the arbor. The ladies began telling me the names of flowers that I could not see, relishing the cruel delight of quizzing me later about what they had told me. Ill-equipped to deal with such eccentric experiences as this, my imagination would not stop racing. They only permitted me to listen and gave me barely enough time to answer. The ladies were smiling, I guessed, and fully aware of the state I was in. I was beginning to confuse their words with my fantasy. Their botanical explanations, as I remember them now, seem as freakish as something out of a delirium. I believe I heard them telling me about flowers that bite and about flowers that kiss, of stems that uproot themselves and climb your body like serpents up to the throat. The darkness, the boredom, the dinner, the chablis, the mysterious conversation about flowers that I couldn't see, and which I don't believe they really had in that stunted garden, all conspired together to lull me to sleep, and so I fell asleep on the bench beneath the vine. The poor captain, I heard when I opened my eyes. Full of illusions, going off to Europe, the light was taken from him. Around me the same darkness still reigned. A warm breeze shook the arbor. Donna Magdalena and Amalia were still conversing with me, resigned to overlook my silence. It seemed to me that they had exchanged seats during my brief dream. That was how it seemed to me. He was a captain of artillery, Amalia told me. Young and handsome as they come. Her voice trembled. And at that moment something happened that would have seemed natural to me under other circumstances, but which just then startled me and made my heart leap into my mouth. The ladies until then had only been perceptible to me by the murmur of their conversation and by their physical presence. At that instant someone in the house opened a window, and without warning the light fell on the faces of the women. And, oh heaven, I saw them light up suddenly, automatically suspended in the air, their black garments indistinguishable in the blackness of the garden, and with that reverent expression welded into their features. They were like the illuminated faces of the paintings of Echave the Elder, like stars, enormous and fantastic. I jumped to my feet, unable to control myself any longer. "Wait," Donna Magdalena cried then, "you have not yet heard the worst." And immediately speaking to Amalia, "My daughter, continue. This young man cannot go away and leave us now without hearing it all." "All right," Amalia said. "The captain went to Europe. He bypassed Paris that night, for he was summoned to Berlin with the utmost urgency. But he yearned with all his heart to see Paris. In Germany he had to study something, I don't know what, having to do with the manufacture of cannons. On the following day a boiler exploded and he lost his sight. I was going crazy. I wanted to ask questions. What questions would you have asked? I wanted to speak. What would you have said? What was happening here? Why had I been invited here? The window was closed, and the faces of the women turned invisible again. The voice of the daughter resounded. "Hey!" Then, and only then, was he summoned to Paris. To Paris that he had wanted with all his heart. Picture him passing beneath the Arc de Triomphe de l'Étoile, a blind man passing beneath the Arc de Triomphe de l'Étoile, guessing at everything around him. But you will tell him about Paris, won't you? You will describe the Paris he could not see. It would do him so much good. Ah, if he is not missing, it would do him so much good. And then they dragged me to the drawing room, carrying me by the arms like an invalid. My feet were tangled in vines and shoots from the garden. There were leaves in my hair. "He is frozen here," they said, showing me a portrait. It was a soldier. He wore a helmet, a white cape, silver braid on the sleeves, and cufflinks like 3 beautiful trumpet valves. His eyes, beneath the perfect wings of his eyebrows, held a singular, beautiful pride. I looked at the ladies. The 2 of them smiled as if with relief at having completed a mission. I examined the portrait again. I looked at myself in the mirror. I verified the resemblance. I was like a caricature of this portrait. The portrait had an inscription and a signature. The handwriting was the same as the writing on the anonymous invitation I had received that morning. The portrait fell from my hands as the 2 ladies gazed upon me with a comical reverence. A noise sounded in my ears, something like a crystal chandelier shattering against the ground. And I ran, crossing unknown streets. Rays of light danced before my eyes. The clocks in their towers spied on me, concatenations of light. Oh, heaven! When I reached, panting, the familiar boards of my door, 9 sonorous chimes shook the night. There were leaves in my hair. In my buttonhole, a modest little flower that I had not picked. In the fields, being a source of knowledge regarding crops, livestock, and other agricultural topics. The crop of the month is Talisman rye. This heirloom variety of rye, available from Coombs Farm in Crisp, Texas, boasts a robust flavor when baked into hearty breads and a distinctive toasted almond notes when distilled into whiskey. This grain thrives when planted between the new and waxing crescent lunar phases by a barefoot virgin at least 1 hour, but no more than 3 after sunset. Soil and goat's manure make for an excellent planting medium. The grain should be harvested when the height reaches the length of a rabid bobcat, and the head of the plant resembles a child's fingernail in hue and texture. Sheep and cattle should be kept separate from the crop, as unfortunate mutations in offspring are possible. As always, thorough toasting before application will significantly reduce the potential risk of cancers, leprosy, and meningitis. And now from Old Wyethscope's Quarterly Concern, dates of import. March 15th, Caesarination Day, 40 CE. Remember and celebrate the day when power-mad tyrants are dispatched ruthlessly by betraying government representatives. April 1st, Reclamation Day, 1740 CE. This banking holiday memorializes the Great Reclamation, which was led by Thomas Deville in 1740. The Great Reclamation resulted in the acquisition of significant land tracts in the south of France by the Consortium des Prêtres d'Argent d'Augustin. The subsequent decimation of the largely agrarian population of the region is speculated to have contributed to the French Revolution. May 4th, Day of the Toucan, 1850 CE. Men don masks with large beaks, while ladies adorn headwear with feathers resplendent in colors bright and merry. The Day of the Toucan was established in 1850 after a revelation set down by noted scryer Michael the Plying, indicating that failure to celebrate, honor, and venerate the noble toucan Guapaca would have dire consequences for this world. We now bring you newsworthy items, bulletins of interest from around the region. Toad explosions continue unabated. Advisory issued. Kythe Town officials warn residents to keep their distance from toads seen on walkways and streets due to continued reports of explosions. Last week, Gertrude of Ranksbury Lane was struck blind when one of the amphibians exploded, sending viscera into her exposed eyes. Naturalists are baffled as to the cause of the phenomena, which has been occurring with regularity for nigh on 3 months. To date, 24 residents have been maimed and traumatized by the bursting things, 3 succumbing to their unfortunate condition. Sanitation workers may be called for cleanup. Bupractico's Most Mundane Meal by Michael Cavagnaro. After 284 years had passed, as time is reckoned by mortals, Bupractico came to a stopping point in its revels with Eosomambius of Criduum. Bupractico placed a delicately patinaed casserole beneath its victim to collect any stray nerve drippings, then abandoned its fiery perch. It discovered Rutrieste at recline in an adjourning burrow. Unclotted blood creatures, gravid with contagion, scurried along the length of its intumescence and the settee itself. Many-taloned silent Lampo was also present, and it contrived to haltingly perform a jolly scherzo upon a skeletal pianoforte. "Art thou so soon finished?" whimpered Rutrieste through a cleft which resembled a sucking wound. By no means, Bupractico assured its colleague under the glower of 1,000 shining, half-lidded eyes. Rutrieste knew instantly that Bupractico was deceitful. "Speak without artifice for once, Bupractico, as do those unsophisticated beasts which lack in guile, that I might give thee counsel." Bupractico, disposed to brutality and hasty rages, quintupled in size, and all but filled that hollow of nigh infinite volume. Yet this act was itself a fiction, and as Bupractico came to accept what it already knew, it returned to a more manageable proportion. "I concede, Rutrieste, that thy concerns may be adequately founded. Though much anticipated, I find my undertakings with Eosomambius to be tedious and drab. Many ages have expired since last I was sated." Rutrieste radiated a lurid green to broadcast a semblance of concern as it surveilled the status of its comrade. "Indeed, thou'rt hardly more than creosote and ash. Lampu, attend us, we shall remedy this without delay." It skillfully transacted a portal into the dwelling plane of flesh, in order to most efficiently negotiate that realm. The infernals extended their quintessence into vessels of a less hypothetical nature. Of this trio, Lampo most closely resembled a human in that form. It conducted itself with the sachet and demeanor of a camp impresario, though the explicit features of its physique seemed to ripple and shift in abstraction. Bupractico chose also to walk upon 2 legs, but, as was its habit, modeled its visage and framing after the attributes of a swine. Rutrieste itself deigned not to adopt such privileged airs, preferring instead to inhabit a multitude of stinging deer-flies. Now Rutrieste had dealings in the past with a certain Talance, indigent proprietor of a midnight food stall in the Yagazir district of Chogar. Upon their arrival at his booth, Talance acknowledged Bupractico and company with an unsubtle scowl. He neither bowed nor stood, remaining anchored to his cross-legged post upon the ground. Their host furnished a disrespectfully and inexpertly prepared table, served without flourish. Blished, a hash of boiled legume, under-seasoned to the point of blandness, mashed and strained, then served upon dried leek leaves, which had been formed into concave shape upon the grubby knee of Peltolance. No hygienic effort was made to guard against pestilence, as if that were the sole fact to pride oneself upon. "Hail, Peltolance! How fares thy lady-love?" buzzed Rutrieste gamely. "Here in Tish is greatly unsound," replied the sweat-soaked Peltolance. He lobbed 3 ladles worth of lukewarm goulash into one of those crude receptacles and held it out toward his guests. Lampo seized upon it greedily, but Roccatrieste's swarm moved to intercept. "Proceed, Bupractico, and indulge thyself." Wanting fingers, Bupractico plunged its snout deep within the offering. The dish's deficiencies were staggering. The notes of apathy and indifference with which the blisht was prepared were matchless, its impurities and abandon of nourishment astonishing. What revocation, that destitution of any notion of obligation to one's clientele! Spake Roccatrieste, "Bupractico, to prepare and devour some unfortunate creature in full, down to the very iota, is thy charge and burden. Thou hast ever been unfailingly overprideful in this role. Behold Peltolance, thy better in every way, whom thou shalt ne'er exceed." Peltolance, evincing a dour expression, had moved to his next customer, a gaunt octogenarian on crutches. Bupractico witnessed the old cripple cast his payment down upon the ground. Peltolance forebore his ladle and scooped a serving for his patron using a bare hand. Lampo then returned, having taken occupancy within the lunatic Hurontish and her children. Under the domination of Lampo, there pranced and gamboled furiously enough to give even listless Peltolance pause, but Bupractico was not in any way diverted. Late that evening, when the diabolic mummery had concluded, there was no sign of Bupractico. Hurontish, confined to her sick room, ranted of sinister hoof prints in the deep muck, but none remaining in Shorg had any heed for her prophecies. Roccatrieste rambled a circuitous route back to the lair of Bupractico, with numerous dog-legs and pleasurable diversions. It then liberated Esomabius, who was peppered with fractal scars but essentially whole. In payment, Esomabius snapped off 4 of his fingers. They were crisp as crackers, into the outstretched paw of Roccatrieste. "My children are thus signified," he said. Roccatrieste lingered there until Eosomabius broke and placed an additional 7 markers. "And your children's children," it winged. With that, the iniquitous bargain was complete. Upon his return to Criduum, 11 surrogate digits did subsequently sprout from the palms of Eosomabius, but these were discolored and behaved shamefully. Only the remaining undefiled 5 of 16 did ever again operate according to their intended function. The corresponding descendants of Eosomabius followed suit in like fashion. Peltolance had little regard for his new apprentice, but an agreement satisfactory to both parties was reached, with the modest payment of a half-congealed bowl of rancid blisht as compensation for the day's labors. Lampo materialized one night whilst Peltolance was away burying his wife, therefore Bupractico had the honor of service. It thoughtlessly slopped a portion of blisht into the leek-leaf bowl it had haphazardly shaped on one knee. Lampo curled preternaturally long fingers around its meal. Overcome with an indecent urge, in one bite the entire parcel was consumed. Its eyes rolled up inside its head, leaving only brilliant whites visible. At this, the disciple of Peltolance chanced a broad grin, flashing row upon row of barbed teeth that extended into perpetuity. And now we bring you wisdom, advice, and prognostications. When banking, a flirty line to say to the teller is keeping it proper like a pauper. Waxing gibbous is the time for action. Do not delay. Something is not right. Something is not right. Something is not right. Inspect all teeth of your children and pets to ensure they are not mannequins or other automata installed by the government for surveillance. And now I bid you a restless night. May you cower in the corner until morning's light. And in the harsh daylight you will see no one really gets out of jail free. Thank you for listening to the Get Out of Jail Free Radio Hour. The Get Out of Jail Free Radio Hour was written, produced, edited, and uploaded by Matt Henshaw, except as indicated.